It's a training instrument that you have to consult that has kind of like all the, not all the answers, but most of the answers, and that it was created for you to actually support you in teaching people or in training others in this path that we are talking regarding decentralized cooperation. So this section actually, it's about having the section 1 is called, as you saw when Sarah was presenting, each of the chapter has a question that we want to answer. So this first session is about what is decentralized cooperation. So this session is aiming to have actually an understanding of the true complexity that decentralized cooperation has. So we're going to be seeing in these different lectures that we have in this first section, that we go from the definition to the principles, later on to see the frameworks, the legislative frameworks that entail decentralized cooperation. And we're going to pass to the history of decentralized cooperation, how it has evolved actually to come to a conceptualization, a new conceptualization, a more transformative conceptualization of decentralized cooperation that is related and that is linked with the furthering or accelerating this 2030 agenda that involves us all. So for this part of this, and as Sarah explained, we have been using for this module an analogy of the bicycle. So we are dividing the different parts of the module in different parts of the bicycle. So here in this section, we're going to be seeing the territory where everything comes into life, where everything lands. So then we are going to see how local and regional governments, how their associations can actually are promoters and are coordinators of this decentralized cooperation that we are mentioning. So if you could go to the next slide, please. Okay, so for DC, that we call decentralized cooperation, has many forms and has many approaches depending on different local governments. We have seen that while researching, so again, Lutando and the team were researching for this model, we saw that there was not really a consensus of practitioners whether they have a unique definition of decentralized cooperation. And one of the things that we suggest and that you are going to be seeing in the module is that you do have a vast literature about decentralized cooperation. So you can go back to those links that are in the module and reflect on the different approaches that people and institutions have regarding decentralized cooperation. So, but for this part, for this training, we have actually got one specific definition that we want to share with you. So for this module, decentralized cooperation is the development cooperation that is between local regional governments and their association acting across borders to first mutually reinforce their capacity and to second involve economic and social actors and regional level to address the development challenges that they have. So if we do have this, we can have this kind of a shared concept. But as it is kind of difficult to conceptualize, as complex to conceptualize the definition of decentralized cooperation, maybe we can just lay it into the principles, because we have seen and we identified that several principles are shared as the current way that decentralized cooperation is working these days. So we can maybe just pass. So as you can see here, most of the principles were actually some of the reflections that you did when you were in the warm-up exercise. So first we have reciprocity and horizontal relations. So this means that actually the relationships between the local governments must be horizontal, must be mutually beneficial, as you were saying, mutually learning from people. It doesn't have to be more. It has evolved from a donor-recipient relation, and it should include respect, it should include trust, and it should include symmetry. So the second principle we have is proximity and participation. We know that the local and regional governments are very close to citizens, and for that, there is the sphere of government close to citizens, and for that, it has the ability to actually mobilize participation, mobilize citizens' talent to actually engage them in trying to solve development challenges. So the third principle is multi-stakeholder and multi-level governance. So we see that also we are going to see in session 5 how the different actors, how are a big part of different actors that are involved in the centralized cooperation. So not just local government actors, but other actors such as civil society, cultural institutions, research institutions, private sector, other spheres of governments, and also multilateral organizations. The fourth one is a geographical alliance based on exchange and mutual learning. As you see, mutual learning is something that you also brought up in the exercise. So these alliances, this principle is about partnership, but partnership with a mutual or with a shared agenda. And in this case, we can have a political shared agenda as the 2030 agenda. And the fifth part, principle, is the greatest possibilities for solidarity. And I think we have seen that through the years, but now in terms of the pandemic, we have seen how decentralized cooperation and how solidarity is very important among governments, just for learning, for exchanging, for looking together to very good solutions. So these are the 5 specific principles that are shared by most of the practitioners. So just to end up this lecture, I just want to reflect a little bit on the next slide, if you could. So just to the legislative framework that guides the centralized cooperation. So here we have we identified 4 groups. We have countries that have crafted specific legal instruments to regulate the international action. So for example, France of Ecuador has a specific legal instruments to have the centralized cooperation. Other countries that have opted to do legislative packages, like Spain, like Mexico, for example. Other countries that acknowledge DC in their legislation, like also Ecuador and Morocco, and most of the countries, which is the biggest group, that do not provide any legal framework to govern DC, but that they accept and support DC, having different kind of modalities for local governments to be engaged in DC. So as I was saying, just for finalizing this lecture, there is not a single definition for DC. There is also a great variation in the way cooperation in legislative governed from country to country, but we can see that there are shared values and that we can work together in this framework of decentralized cooperation.